Hello, and welcome to Connect, the show where we shine a light on what brings us together, especially when so many feel disconnected. I'm your host, Sandra Harris, co-leader of the Massachusetts Coalition to Build Community and End Loneliness. Each month, we bring you conversations that help us better understand loneliness and social isolation, healthy aging, and how to build stronger, healthier, more connected communities in Massachusetts. And today, we're adding a whole new dimension, a generational one. Increasingly, young people are encountering loneliness and stepping up to do something about it, especially in fostering connections with older adults. My guest today is a powerful example of that. I'm thrilled to welcome Arielle Galinsky as the co-chair of the Coalition's work group to cultivate a culture of connection in the Commonwealth. Arielle is a Harvard student, a fellow at CoGenerate, the founder of the Legacy Project, a youth-led effort that connects generations through storytelling and civic engagement. She's also involved in the Let's Make Next Gen CoGen Pledge Project, which encourages young people to stand with older adults and work together for a more inclusive future. And if that weren't enough, Arielle recently published a powerful article in Vogue Teen magazine called Trump Healthcare Policies Targeting Old Americans, Why Gen Z Should Care. Arielle, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me today, Sandra.
Okay, you've been doing such important work at the intersections of generations. What first inspired you to get involved in bridging the gap between young and older adults? Was there a moment or relationship that made it personal for you?
Yeah, I really appreciate that question. You know, my journey, the intergenerational journey, really began when I was in high school. I grew up as an only child in my family. I've always been surrounded by older adults, and that was always, that intergenerational component was very normal for me. When I was in high school, I started working in a senior community. I grew up in a suburb outside of Massachusetts, and I worked there for a number of years where I got to interact with a lot of the older adults living in that community. I had lost my grandfathers when I was 10 years old, and something that I'd always held very close to me is that I had looked up to my two grandfathers and yet had never had the opportunity or the foresight to ask them about their life stories. So when I worked in the senior community, I was like, this is a perfect opportunity to do so. I knew that I was not unique in the sense that holding that regret of not asking my own grandfathers about their life histories. And so this is what actually started the Legacy Project. I worked, when I was working in this community, I put out a sign-up sheet and I said, who would want to spend a few hours talking to me to tell me about their life history? And the reaction was immense. We ended up getting over 20 people in a wait list of individuals living in this community who wanted to share about their life story. That began what was known as the Legacy Project and has since grown quite immensely to college campuses and connecting younger and older generations for sharing life histories and other perspectives. And that was my in. That was when I realized how much more powerful we can be when we connect across generations, not just for storytelling, but in co-leading, in leading initiatives like the coalition that we're on together. There's so many opportunities. I know we're going to jump into that, but that was the perpetuating factor for me.
Okay, wonderful. What do you think Gen Z would like or wishes older generations or the world really to understand about them?
Yeah, I appreciate that question because I think oftentimes intergenerational programs are looked at as this very unidirectional type of relationship, right? Where either older adults are sharing their wisdom or younger adults are volunteering their time. And what's often overlooked is that there is a lot of benefit to this mutual connection in this generation. But there are misconceptions that I think both generations hold against the younger or the older. CoGenerate, you mentioned that I'm a fellow with them, and they recently published a very powerful report with AARP called What Younger Allies Want and Don't Want from Older Allies. And there was many different insights from this, but it was actually found in partnership with the University of Chicago's NORC organization that 76% of younger people of Gen Z report wanting opportunities to work with older generations. But there are a lot of barriers in doing so. And there's a lot of things that, to your point, younger people believe aren't understood about them. For one thing, I think Gen Z often hears from older adults and from the mainstream media that the future's on us, that we're the ones leading the way. And while that is an opportunity, it's also super. It's very much a huge burden, a huge weight to think that the entire future rides on us. And so we need to learn from older generations who've already been through this, who've weathered the storm, who've shown what it means to be resilient and to go through political, economic, financial obstacles, that we don't want to do this alone. We want to work in intergenerational partnership. And I think that's one key thing that's often overlooked. Another thing is, as Gen Z and thinking about the current policy realm, we are facing just so much immense weight as it relates to economic pressures, not knowing how we're going to pay for student debt with the rising cost of college, not knowing how we're going to afford a home, not knowing how we are going to, take care of our parents in long-term care as the costs rise. And so I think empathy from our older allies is really critical and something that's often misunderstood and not really considered in the mainstream conversation.
Studies show that Gen Z reports some of the highest level of loneliness. Yet it's also a generation deeply involved in activism, equity, and reimagining the future. Mm-hmm. Why do you think this combination of isolation and passion is drawing so many young people toward this intergenerational way of solving issues?
Yeah, I think that's a really excellent question. I think COVID-19 really highlighted this loneliness epidemic that has been going on for many years, both for younger populations and for older populations. I think for a lot of young people during the midst of the pandemic, when they were in their home environments, many of which who were living with older adults in their family, whether that was their parents, their grandparents, in close consortium with their older neighbors living nearby or supporting older neighbors, I think there was this realization that intergenerational partnership is really critical. And I think for many of my peers, and I know for myself, I spent much of the pandemic actually speaking to older adults. I was working in a community where I would call 60 older adults living in that community on a weekly basis throughout the entirety of the pandemic. And I know, I'm going to speak very personally here, I think while my role was to be of support to them, I found that I, as someone who was trapped in a home, just like much of the country at that time, that my own loneliness was certainly supported by the fact that I had these conversations with older adults. And throughout the pandemic and far beyond, I think those impacts just continued. And so I think for a lot of young people, the realization that they are able to build community and friendship with people older than them while also learning has been a really critical understanding that I think has come to surface as a result of the very isolating times that the pandemic was.
Okay. You talked earlier about bi-directional benefits in these relationships. Mm-hmm. What does that mean, and how does one sustain that over time?
Yeah. So I think there's a lot of powerful examples of what this could look like. And I don't think there's one size fits all, and I think that's really important. For example, in the work that I do with the Legacy Project, we pair students and older adults in their communities for intergenerational storytelling. But what we really try to emphasize is that, students are not just listening to the stories of the older adults, but that they are also sharing their own perspectives, that it's a mutual exchange of learning from one another, that maybe the older adult has a skill or perspective that they're able to share with the younger, but likewise that the younger is able to share something back. This mutual exchange of knowledge rather than a one-directional, give or take, I think is a really critical thing. I think there's a lot of examples of like this. There's many organizations where you see intergenerational power sharing, right? And older and younger collectively working to lead a committee or lead an organization, where it's not an imbalance of, the older has more power because they have more years of experience, but that there's value brought to both perspectives, and to the new perspective of the younger, the more experienced perspective of the older, and how that can combine to lead a really powerful organization or initiative. And so I think that's just another one example of where I see it in practice. But this idea of bidirectional is, how can we actually pair generations for something that is mutually beneficial to both parties and to the broader community and society that they're in, rather than just kind of a single source of sharing wisdom or power with the other.
That reminds me of our relationship.
It does. And I think the coalition's a really good example of that. The intergenerational leadership of, from that trickles down into the committee leadership, it demonstrates how powerful it can really be.
Okay. In your Vogue Teen article, you discussed the danger of healthcare policies that negatively impact older adults, and why this should matter to Gen Z. Exactly what were you trying to convey in that article?
Yeah, I think that's that's an excellent question. I think oftentimes older adult policies that affect older adults, whether that you're talking about Social Security, Medicare, even Medicaid, long-term care, is often seen as a policy and a problem for older populations. This is a massive misconception, because truth be told, all of these programs being cut, from the administration of community living proposed to be eliminated, to potential cuts to Medicaid, and which will affect long-term care, will affect young adults of today, but also in the future, right? Right now, there's currently about an estimated 3.6 million youth caregivers in the United States, all of which are already facing the brunt of a lack of a system in place in the United States to support familial caregivers. That is an impact that we will feel even more heavy if these policies and these programs and this funding is cut on a state and federal level. But I also think it's really critical for young people and Gen Z to understand, and many of which already do, and is not really brought to surface in the mainstream media, is that policies that are stripped today are going to impact our parents and will impact us in the future. If the Administration for Community Living is completely eliminated and never brought back, then all those services that are being brought by that agency won't be there for our parents. It won't be there for us someday. And so I always say that, young people, Gen Z, millennials, they should care about policies related to older adults and to older populations, because eventually that is going to affect us. It's an extreme form of self-interest to be able to have the foresight to be a part of this intergenerational advocacy effort, and to be able to support the current older adults, but also realizing that that is going to be us someday, and that we need to say something before it's too late.
But at the same time, we hear so many young adults talking about our feeling that Social Security should not be in their future, and why should they care about it? Is that true, or is there a myth to that?
It's actually the mainstream conversation that Social Security is going to be gone is not correct. It is true that in about a decade or so that we won't be able to pay out to the same extent of benefits that we are today. I think it's about 80% of benefits will be able to be paid out. So certainly Congress is going to face a pivotal point where 80% cuts in benefits to people will have a major life day-to-day impact for individuals who rely on Social Security. But this belief that Social Security is just going to vanish is not true, unless, at least as it currently stands. And so I think it's a public education issue, really, and I think a lot of about that for a lot of things related to long-term care as well. But I think that Congress and state legislators will have to do something to fill in that gap. But it will be there as long as we continue to push our legislators to ensure that Social Security isn't cut completely. But I think the perception is real. What you're saying is real. That young people are fearful that these programs won't be there. And for that reason, they have a sense of distrust for government and for these social insurance programs. And so how can we build up that layer of trust, I think, is a problem that we need to collectively solve.
Some people assume that young people and older adults have nothing in common. So what are we missing? We kind of live in that generational bubble.
Yep. Yeah, this generational division that you're speaking to is very real. The perception is incredibly present, and I feel it sometimes even when bringing on young students into the Legacy Project, this original hesitation that they might feel before actually participating in the project because of first, never having familiarity with working or speaking to an older adult outside of their direct family, but also just this fear that they won't be understood, that older adults have different beliefs and structures and grew up in different times, that they won't be able to relate to them. And I think in some part, there are generational differences. And I think that's the beauty of partnering generations, right? And so by creating these age silos, we're ultimately doing a disservice to ourselves and to the potential benefits that it can bring to communities. I think that these differences should solely be embraced, that people need to realize that a Gen Z learning from a baby boomer is something that we can share a lot of learnings from, right? Baby boomers who grew up and have lived through a multitude of different political and economic upturns and downfalls, and who can speak to some of these issues that we're facing today as teens and 20-somethings. And so I think that this perception of age division being a negative thing is what we have to change on its head. That there are differences, but those should be embraced, not feared.
You were leading this Let's Make Next Gen Cogen pledge. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so Let's Make Next Gen Cogen was an idea that really sprouted from this conversation of how do we get more young people into the fold? How do we circulate this idea of intergenerational connections and why it's so critical and why it is something that is trendy and interesting for people to want to hop on the bandwagon, right? And I was actually thinking back to my own experience when I was in elementary school and middle school, and I remember there was a really powerful campaign that came out by Special Olympics. It was called Stop the R Word campaign, and they were able to effectively all across the country, all across the world, get young people to sign on to this pledge to stop using the R word. And this was a powerful example of how a small pledge can change behavior, how just signing your name onto something and getting a list of ideas into your inbox every few weeks can actually cause you to alter the way in which you view the world around you and your own communities and the people around you. And hence came this idea of a Cogen pledge, which we are directing toward, well, anyone can sign it, but we are certainly promoting it specifically to high school, college-age students, right, who are in a place, who are living in intergenerational communities as is, but who might not be interacting across age divides. And so how can we have them sign this pledge, utilize it as a tool to share it with others in their communities, on social media, you name it, but also they get these very tangible ideas that they can easily implement into their communities, whether that's hosting an intergenerational coffee chat or dinner, doing a service day in their communities that might cross age divides. So whether that's picking up trash on Earth Day or helping serve food at a local shelter, how can we work collectively across generations to do that? And so by people signing this pledge, it provides them an in and a reason to partake in this. And the hope is that once people start engaging intergenerationally, that it just will become a norm for them in their day-to-day lives. And it takes literally 30 seconds for you to sign your name, and you'll automatically get an email with a whole list of ideas about how you can engage intergenerationally in your own communities.
Okay, good. So if someone from Gen Z or from an older adult or boomer is interested and is watching and want to build a connection with someone in another generation, how do they get started?
I recommend that you, if you're interested in doing this in your community, see what already exists. Go to, there's two wonderful, CoGenerate is one wonderful resource, as well as Generations United. Generations United is an organization that's basically an umbrella organization of intergenerational programs across the United States. They have a database on their website where you can look up geographically for intergenerational programs that are recognized by them. There's hundreds of them. Very well, there might be a program already existing in your very own town or community that you might not know about, with contact information for you to reach out. And if it doesn't exist, you can easily, regardless of whether you're younger or older, there's opportunities to get involved intergenerationally. If you're Gen Z and you live in a college community, reach out to the local senior center. Ask if you can go for the day to host a coffee chat or a dinner or bring cookies or play games, whatever it might be. Or share your stories, as the Legacy Project does. If you're an older adult, likewise. If you live in proximity to a high school or to a college, reach out to an activities director or someone who leads an engagement within those communities, and try to find opportunities for partnership.
Connections doesn't have to be complicated, right?
No.
It can start with something small but grow into something deeply meaningful. Sometimes it's just saying hi, how are you, right? To illustrate how powerful these intergenerational relationships can be, let's go to our field reporter, Melissa Donegan, who spoke with someone who has experienced it firsthand. Melissa?
Thank you, Sandra. Today I am joined by Carolyn Dik to share an older adult's perspective on intergenerational relationships. Carolyn, thank you so much for joining us today. So my first question, I'd really like for you to describe a relationship that you have in your life with a younger person that has significantly impacted you, and maybe tell us a little bit how that relationship started. Yes, please do.
Recently, I went to a party at my local senior center in Millbury. It was a May Day party, and Millbury High School seniors were participating and helping out. And I was asking questions. Well, it happened to be the National Honor Society group. So I said to Juliet, I said, oh, I was too a million years ago, because I'm going to be 78 in July. So it's been a few years. But I remember getting my 2 gold pins. And the music they were playing, the dance, was like something from my mother's era, because these kids wanted to have something that appealed to seniors. But, at my age, we're still cool. We like rock and roll. So I
They went a little too far back.
Yeah. So anyway, I went up to talk to the kids. So I wanted to touch on that. When I started talking with the kids and told them that I had my National Honor Society designation, and I still have my 2 pins somewhere in one of my jewelry boxes.
Yeah.
They thought it was a hoot, because they didn't even think it was invented, that existed in those days. And I talked to several of the kids, and they all had the same thing in common. They want to do something as far as community service, because being over with us at the senior center was definitely that. They all get, as you know, excellent grades. And they all wanted to do something to make the world a better place in the future, which is the way we thought too. So the core values, whether you're almost 80 or you're 17, 18 years old, are the same.
And some people would assume that older and younger folks have very little in common. So what would you say to people who think that?
Try it. Make a point to take, if you have grandchildren that want to spend time with you, take them out to lunch, one-on-one, talk.
Yeah.
Or, think of an activity you can bring them to. If there's something that they think their grandchild or a neighbor or a niece, nephew, whatever, would like, do it. Take the step, because the benefits are tremendous. Keeps you young, because you start thinking and understanding how the younger folks think. And I don't think about my age, never have. And I think that's a good thing. I try to behave, appropriately for my age. That's a concern of mine. But I like to talk to the kids about what's going on and how they feel. Everybody, whether you're 80 or you're, whatever, 10 years old, you can benefit by being with the other generations.
Yeah. Wow. So it seems like you have really learned a lot through these intergenerational connections. So how have these relationships with younger folks sort of changed anything for you around loneliness and connection? You sound very busy and like you're involved in a lot, but did you notice any change in your own feelings around connection once you started these relationships?
When you're homebound, and that's all you do is eat, sleep, and watch TV, that's leading a sedentary lifestyle. Long-term depression, when you talk to them, the glass is always half empty, despair, they got this problem, that problem, doctor's appointments, poor nutrition because they get depressed and get lazy, poor nutritional choices, and they feel that they're powerless to make a difference.
Yeah.
I say no to that.
Mm-hmm.
You got air to breathe. There's people around you, even making a smile, going, saying hi to a neighbor who's walking a different direction, just to say, hi, haven't seen you, but good morning.
Yeah,
How's it going?
yeah.
Might be the only nice gesture that someone makes to them that day. Take that step. What does it cost you? A minute of your time?
Well, that's such a great perspective to have, Carolyn. And thank you so much for your time today with us. So I hope someone watching this today will now feel more comfortable or know where to start with adding this into their life. So thank you so much. Back to you, Sandra.
Thank you, Melissa. What a beautiful reminder that connection truly has no age limit. The friendships we build across generations can enrich our lives in unexpected ways. Arielle, hearing that story reminds me to think about how these relationships are not just meaningful, they're transformational on both sides. It reminds me of our relationships and the relationships we have created as part of the coalition.
Yeah.
Before you leave and as you look ahead, what is your hope for what an intergenerational community might look like in the future?
You know, as someone who cares so deeply about connecting across generations, it is truly my hope that this idea of co-generation, of young people working with older people and all throughout the age span is no longer something that we have to actively think about, but that becomes the norm. So that when you're looking at our political officials, think of AOC and Bernie Sanders, for example, working across generations to better a cause or to further a cause that they care about. That is what I dream of in the next decade, in the next 50 years, that we will be able to start seeing that connecting across generations is no longer has to be through programmatic solutions, but that we are seeing this generally happen on a very organic basis.
And we see you as a force in pushing that future. Arielle, thank you so much for joining us today. This is really remarkable. Your voice, your work, your commitment to connections, exactly what we need at this moment. Thank you for being an inspiration to all of us.
Thank you, Sandra, for everything.
Thank you. Today's conversation reminds us that when we open our hearts across age lines, something beautiful occurs. We transcend stereotypes and assumptions, begin to build relationships that are bi-directional and meaningful. Young adults like Arielle are showing us that connection is not only possible, it's urgent. And older adults are showing us that friendship doesn't retire with age. So whether you're 19 or 90, the invitation remains the same. Reach out, start a conversation, share your story, and listen to someone else's. Because when generations come together to learn, to laugh, to care, we don't just feel less lonely, we become more whole. I'm Sandra Harris, and this is Connect. Thank you for joining us, and until next time, let's continue reaching out and creating a more connected world, one relationship at a time. Visit us at endlonelinessma.com to watch previous episodes, learn more about the Coalition to Build Community and End Loneliness, and discover ways you can join the movement to help alleviate loneliness and promote healthy aging in Massachusetts.